Today, I'm going to tell you how anyone, even an American, can reduce their taxes legally by 80, 90, or even 100% by following my simple 4-step formula. I'm going to break down everything that you need to know to legally reduce your taxes offshore. And this can apply to an entrepreneur. It can also apply with some modifications to someone who's an investor, whether it's in stocks or if you have royalty income or if you are in cryptocurrency. This is the formula that you need to know. And if you think that, hey, I'm an American, we have citizenship-based taxation, yeah, I've separated Americans versus almost everyone else. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But even Americans, the average person who talks to us is saving more than 80% of their tax bill. Some save closer to 90% and some save even 100%, whereas the average, almost everyone else, saves closer to 90%. And some of those savings are because people only choose to go to tax-friendly countries rather than tax-free countries. Because for many people, they would leave 5 or 10 percentage points on the table to move to a country in Europe rather than moving to a country that doesn't have taxes. I mean, if you're saving 80%, like maybe you just add a lifestyle equation in at the end and give back a few points. And so anyone can move their business overseas and dramatically lower their taxes using my tax-friendly quadrant. And so here are the elements. Number one, on one side, there is you. These are things that you need to do. Here are things that your business needs to do. Or again, with some modifications, this could be certain investments. And so the first thing you need to figure out is, where are you leaving? The first quadrant is you're leaving somewhere. Where is that place? And so if you are an American, you have fewer options, admittedly. Your first option is you could move to Puerto Rico. And so the system in Puerto Rico is a little bit different. If you're moving a business for the purposes of eventually selling that business, there's a different formula that comes into play when it comes to how much of your capital gains can be tied to Puerto Rico versus how much are in the US at the full rates. And so you can go down to Puerto Rico, and on some stuff, you're just totally tax-free. On other stuff, you're down into the single digits. And so if you leave and go to Puerto Rico, you want to do that sooner rather than later to get more time in Puerto Rico. Whereas if you're going to move overseas, it's more of an issue of what's your business worth when you move versus what's your business worth when you sell. But right now, we're only talking about the actual annual savings, right? If you save $365,000 in tax, that's an extra $1,000 in your pocket every day. So you'll want to know where it is that you're leaving. If you're an American, Puerto Rico. You can also go offshore. And the factor here is, how much of your business do you own? Do you have foreign partners? There are other things, who's your spouse? Those can all impact how much you can lower your taxes, anywhere from 80 down to 100 percentage points. Depending on how you do that. The other thing you get to take advantage of as an American is what's called the foreign earned income exclusion. And so if you own a business, you can take the first about $120,000 a year, it increases a little bit every year, out tax-free. And so if you, we'll get to the point in a minute where you can employ yourself in your own foreign business, that first basically $10,000 a month can come out and you basically pay 0, 0, 0 across the board. That knocks out most Social Security. Medicare gets generally knocked out, and so you can save a lot of the payroll tax and stuff like that, and you get your first 10 grand for free. So as an American, you will have more restrictions on what you can do with the money. That's a whole separate video. If you want to learn more about how Americans can reinvest the money that they keep in their foreign corporations, leave a comment below. But if you're an American, here are your choices. Puerto Rico, you're going to save a little bit more, but you're going to be restricted. Offshore, the US is actually a bit more flexible than some other countries in that they don't entirely care where you are in some circumstances. They just want you to not be in the US. And so the more settled you are in one particular place, the more time you can spend back in the US. Or you can do as I did. I really didn't want to go to the US, and so I just took advantage of being wherever I wanted to be. And so you combine the foreign earned income exclusion combined with where your business is located, and you pick one of these two options to determine, I'm leaving the US. Now, if you're living almost everywhere else, I say almost. There are a few countries, Mexico, some of the Scandinavian countries, I think Israel in some cases, where they're going to follow you for a couple of years, and they're going to say, hey, you can only go to this pre-approved list of countries, or you're going to follow certain criteria, or else we're going to come and we're going to whack you over the head. Australia has now, we recently announced, they've rolled out what I would call de facto citizenship-based taxation, where if you're Australian and you do the offshore approach where you don't go and fully settle in one place, they're saying, well, hey, you might as well just pay tax in Australia, and they're going to be pushing that. So I do think we'll see more countries treating their citizens as the US does. It's only a matter of time. Australia is starting to push that in some circumstances. But almost everyone else, the answer is very simple. Where are you leaving? Whatever country you live in, that's where you're tax resident, okay? So the fact that you're a citizen is not the same as being a tax resident. If I moved to Australia, I'm not an Australian, but I'll still be in some of the same boat as an Australian citizen because I've become a tax resident by virtue of living there, by virtue of maintaining my ties there, having a closer connection, what have you. So I'm going to become TNR in my country, and in some countries that's easier than others. The English-speaking countries, by and large, set aside Ireland, have become rather difficult in that. They become, especially in Canada, Australia, what have you, it's harder to break your tax residence. You don't get to spend that much time back there. The idea that you spend 182 days, 1 day less than the 183, long gone. So you're going to become a non-resident for tax purposes, and that may be easy, that may be difficult. You're also going to potentially have an exit tax. Now, if you come back over here to the US, Americans have one other option. They can renounce their citizenship. If you have less than $2 million, if your income hasn't been that high, and if your taxes are all in compliance, under $2 million bucks, you can leave and you can pay no exit tax. Above there, it starts to get tricky. Same thing as when you become tax non-resident. You're going to pay tax on, let's say there's a business, and they value your business at a whole lot of money. They're not going to just let you take that business with you. There's going to be some kind of exit tax. Same thing on a stock. That's why it's always better to get out sooner than later. I've been telling people, let's say crypto investors, if you buy Bitcoin at $30,000, you want to take the advantage of Bitcoin going down and then it's back at $30,000. That's the time to leave when there's no capital gain because you avoid that exit tax. If you wait for it to go to $60,000 when you're feeling great, you're going to leave and pay a big exit tax. And so everyone but Americans, at least for now, is going to pay that when they become tax non-resident. Americans are going to pay that when they renounce. And so again, the formula of moving to Puerto Rico versus renouncing is a little bit different. Puerto Rico is more time-based. Renunciation is more value-based. And so we do have some people who choose to go to Puerto Rico. We have some people who choose to move offshore and just save that 80 to 100%, depending on their circumstances. And if you renounce, you basically just free up all the restrictions that are on you from having to choose one of those two, and you put yourself in the same bucket because you will get a citizenship that puts you in this category. But that's you, and that's, I'm just going to put it right here in the middle so everyone sees exactly what we're talking about. The first part of the tax-friendly quadrant is where you are leaving. And so let's talk about the next part, the fun part. Don't run from something, run to something. Run to more personal freedom, lower taxes, a country that wants you to be there. They incentivize you, they love you, they're glad to have you. They send you a Christmas card. Thanks for your contribution. Where are you arriving? And so what are the considerations that you want to keep in mind here? Well, number one, are you going to be what Australia is trying to discourage? Where they say, hey, digital nomads, we're going to tax you in Australia. That's the direction that they're saying they're going. Am I going to be arriving in a place that I'm going to live full time? Am I going to follow Andrew's trifecta method where I have 3 different homes 4 months a year? Am I going to be a digital nomad and just drag a suitcase around and run my business from wherever I am at the time? Where am I arriving? You're going to want to have some kind of tax residence. Now, if you're not going to be living in one place for a majority of the time, you may need to go out and get a separate tax residence, or let's say a paper tax residence for someone who's constantly on the go. If you don't have that and you're no longer tax resident in some other country, you're going to have trouble getting bank accounts, brokerage accounts, stuff like that. That's the one benefit Americans have, is that they always have a tax residence. It's the United States. It's not a good thing, but occasionally it comes in handy, which is why Americans have a bit more flexibility being digital nomads as the rest of the world cracks down on that. So where are you going to live? Most successful business owners that we talk to these days want to spend a majority of their time in one place. They're worried about things like time zones. They want to run their business. So if you're saving big money, it may be easier just to be in one place and have that continuity. What are the different kinds of places that you can arrive? There is tax-free. There is territorial tax, which is often misunderstood. That's where we don't tax the money you make outside the country. So my business is in Hong Kong. I live in Thailand. That's when it's not earned in Thailand. Now, sometimes your salary that you take out of that company could get taxed. There are certain ways to structure that. There are non-dom tax regimes. That's a remittance-based. Most people think as long as they don't bring the money into the country, oh, I'll just move my business overseas and I won't leave my country. And as long as I don't bring the money back to Canada, they figured that one out. You cannot simply avoid remitting money in a residential tax jurisdiction, which is almost every Western jurisdiction. If you live there, you pay tax worldwide, whether you remit the money or not. Plus there's CFC, PE, other issues, but that's a separate point. Non-dom, there are countries in Europe, the UK, Malta, Cyprus, Ireland, etc., where if you are a foreigner, general definition, you can pay tax on the money that you remit. And so here, basically that's what it is. You make $5 million a year, you have $500,000 in living expenses, and you profit off of that spread because you're only basically paying the full tax on this $500,000, and the rest of the money stays overseas. You've also got lump sum regimes. Italy and Greece and Switzerland, you pay a fixed amount. Again, if you make $5 million, and Italy says we'll tax you $100,000, you're paying a 2% tax rate. So it behooves you to make more money, which, by the way, generally most people who move overseas do. So where are you arriving? There's tax-free. There's also exceptional tax regimes, and you can see my penmanship is not strong as quality. You can read that. Exceptional. Where, hey, we give you a 5-year exception, for example, or a 10-year exception. So people talk about Portugal, for example. You can live in Portugal for 10 years. It's not going to play nice with all the business structures, and it's not going to be the best for people who make multi-millions. But hey, we're going to give you a deal for a while, and after a while, it's going to run out. By the way, some lump sum regimes also have a certain time limit on them. So those are the different places where you can move. Now, if you are an American, often easier to move to a place where there is not any tax on the local side. So territorial could be zero tax if you structure it properly. If you don't structure it properly, people, I think, sometimes take too many liberties. But these are pretty straightforward. You're not going to pay anything in that other jurisdiction. Therefore, all you've got to do is make sure that the U.S. stays at bay. You pay them a little bit of money. In some cases, if you're in that camp that's paying, 10 to 20%, you're still dramatically reducing your taxes. And then you don't complicate things to where you're dealing with two different countries and trying to get them to work together. Because even the U.S. and Canadian systems often don't play nice, let alone the U.S. and like the UAE. If you renounce U.S. citizenship, if you're somebody else, or if you don't mind extra tax compliance where you're dealing with two different companies, Nomad Capitalist does that for our clients because we have the network of people all over the world, tax attorneys and preparers, and we know how to talk to them and make them work together. I don't know that anyone else really knows how to do that, quite frankly. These guys selling you structures, selling you passports, pushing product. Are they helping guys in the U.S. and wherever else talk to each other and get on the same page? It's pretty hard. From 15 years of experience, I'll tell you that. But if I'm going to one of these countries down here and I'm still paying tax in the U.S., I'm going to have a bit of overlap. I may have a tax treaty that helps me to where I'm not going to pay more tax, but I'm going to have more tax compliance. If you renounce U.S. citizenship or if you're anybody else, these systems make more sense. Again, if you're making $5 million a year, a little extra tax compliance in Europe and the U.S. isn't the worst thing if you have someone who can help you do that, but you want to be aware moving to a place like Europe involves a bit more tax planning. It is not something to be taken lightly. So that's where you are arriving. Now, we're going to do the exact same thing for your business. This is the tax-friendly or the tax-free, depending on how you do it, quadrant. So again, we've determined if you don't do all these 4 things together, this doesn't work. You can't just say, I'm not leaving, but my business is arriving. They figure that one out. What do they say? These days, you can't just move your assets, you have to move your and so it's not just one, you have to actually move. Most people will find that they're going to be gone overseas between 9 and 12 months a year. Now, depending on where you live and depending on where you're from, maybe that could be 8 months a year. But once you start getting beyond that, I'm not giving you tax advice, but just generically speaking, from all the different circumstances we've seen and all the different tax attorneys and professionals we've talked to around the world, you're going to plan on spending 8 to 12 months out. Now, okay, fine. I mean, probably in most situations, someone could at least spend a month, right? So 8 to 11 months is what you're going to need to do based on your situation. Now, where's your business leaving? You can't just take a successful business and say, hey guys, I'm out. They're going to say, well, wait a second, you built that value here. So you may have an exit tax on the business. You may have a personal exit tax, but that's going to lump in the business that you own. If that business has value, this is why you need to get that business valued. The good news is some entrepreneurs think their business is worth more than what it is. You want the tax valuation, not your, I really think I can sell it for this high number. That's a hard thing for some entrepreneurs to get a handle on. They're like, I can sell it for a lot of money. It's like, what would be the actual tax scenario? You don't want to go unnecessarily under because you're talking to the goody two-shoes of the offshore world. We're not going to be just making numbers up, but you don't want to have some pie-in-the-sky number that you're never going to get. You want to have real tax professionals with letters and licenses after their name figure out what your business is worth, and that's why it's ideal to move out sooner than later. Now, some businesses have worse situations than others. I mean, if you don't really have a lot of IP, they're just kind of, especially if you're like the only employee in your business, like that's easier. So generically speaking, the more employees you get, the more profits you get, the more assets you get, it's going to be harder to leave and you have to pay more tax. And so what I've seen is people who they don't want to leave because eventually it becomes too expensive to leave. You got to leave earlier than later. But then where's the business arriving? Let's say you have a little bit of tax to pay on the exit side in order to move your business to a new, clean, beautiful, tax-free structure. Now, these may not be the same. People think, oh, where I'm arriving should be the same as where my business is arriving. Not necessarily. Now, the Cayman Islands, for example, set up a company, get a residence permit. The UAE, Dubai, for example, they have that as well. But if you don't want to live in one of those places where it's kind of a baked-in package, again, just putting these two together still doesn't solve this. This is the hardest part right here, actually. This part is easy. Setting up a company in some foreign jurisdiction, there's people who churn out thousands of those a month. They're not solving this problem for you. But where you're arriving, I like living in Malaysia. I like living in, a country like a non-dom country. I like living in, moving around. I don't necessarily want to live where my company lives. And so now I'm going to figure out where I'm arriving, where do they allow my company to be? If I'm living in Portugal, I'm going to have restrictions on tax havens where my company is based. So that's where someone might say, hey, listen, I want to live in a place like Portugal. I'm willing to pay, 5 or 6 or 7 percentage points more to live in Portugal. I will only save 83% rather than the 88% I could save, and I'm going to pay the extra points to Portugal because they don't let me optimize to the maximum extent my corporate savings. That's a lifestyle choice. Whereas I might say, hey, Greece is going to give me a few extra percentage points over Italy. And so it's a different, if you're making $5 million a year, Greece or Italy probably saves you money if money's the only thing that matters over Portugal. If you're making $500,000 a year, Portugal's probably going to save you money, but it's going to add a little bit of compliance. These are the things that nobody talks about when they're just selling you a company or they're just selling you a residence permit. You have to figure out how it works holistically. And so your business leaves, now it's able to arrive. And so we've made a separate training, we'll put the link in the description, of how you want to build your optimal offshore structure. We've got a whole separate whiteboard on that. But the business arrives and then it transacts there. And so you might just not just have one corporate structure, by the way. You might need a multi-part structure, and that's what we've covered in the separate whiteboard training. I want to go into, I'll let you watch the other training, okay? So understand these parts are not that difficult. Now, we've helped at Nomad Capitalist clients move over the last couple of years to 31 different tax-friendly countries. Gotten passports in close to 30, I think 28, many of them for Americans who either want to do this or want the option to do this because they don't want to go here. They want the freedom that everyone else has. We've helped people open bank accounts in dozens of jurisdictions, and this is all done legally with our network of people that help people stay in compliance. But understand, you want to know all your options of going here. How many people have said, I want to move to Dubai, that when they're told, hey, why not some country in Europe? Why not a country in Asia? Why not a country in Latin America? Oh, that sounds better. I just thought there was only one option. It was Dubai. Yeah, that's because everyone who sells Dubai, that's all they know how to do. Like, that's pretty simple. Setting up companies is not hard. What's hard is, how do you get out? How does this get out? This part is the part that most people are missing. There are issues down here to consider, by the way. In the UAE now, you are seeing some basic audits. Hong Kong was a popular option for a lot of online business owners. They have audits. If you're coming from the US, for example, it's going to be a more intense required annual audit. And so we have a finance team that handles that stuff for us, but some clients come in and say, hey, listen, I want something that's lighter weight. And so you might have a multi-part corporate structure that allows you to, let's say you want to just have a BVI company and you want some kind of local subsidiary that operates in where you're arriving. If that cooperates with where you're personally living, that may be easier if you want to avoid audits, for example. And so there's things that you want to consider before you set up a company that has, let's say, a higher ongoing maintenance cost or an ongoing audit requirement or whatever it is that you don't want to do. Now, here's the fly in the ointment. I think more of these countries, as I said, are going to come over to the US standard. And so I think that if you're saving hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year as a Canadian, Australian, maybe some Europeans, it's worth investing in a second citizenship to make sure that you can continue to leave your country the way that Americans have restrictions on. And so what I can tell you as someone who's obtained multiple citizenships, there was times when I was doing the work, paying the donation, doing whatever it took to get that citizenship. I said, I'm not going to need this one. I really never regret it because now I know I have options no matter what one country does to me. That's a powerful feeling. So I think that investing part of your savings into whether it's citizenship by descent, whether it's citizenship by investment, whether you choose to move to a country like a Portugal where you can get citizenship if you learn the language, that's maybe a case for an English-speaking country where you can work towards getting citizenship while saving taxes without having to learn a new language. That's something that many people don't consider, right? I think that the non-dom countries don't get enough love, quite frankly, especially because they're generally English-speaking. So this is how you're going to save money by moving your business overseas. Again, 80 to 100%. With most Americans being the 80s, most of everybody else being the 90s. Would you be willing to do this? What are your questions? What do you want to know? Leave a comment below. And if you're looking to do this and you're saying, oh my goodness, just go to nomadcapitalist.com and our team will be happy to help you figure out your 4 quadrants because there's a lot of options.